I would love to give this presentation to your group. I want to try to convince people to write their representative and suggest that their representative sponsor this bill. And in my presentation, I explain why we need this bill. The state legislature has taken away much of the elected school board's authority to deny a charter school application. My number 3 suggestion is to require a zoning change before a charter school is allowed to build a new school. The impetus for asking for a law that requires a zoning change stemmed from what happened here in Duval County. A charter school built across the street from an A-rated district-run elementary school. The reason the charter school didn't need to get a zoning change is because the school was being built on land that had been zoned for a church. The traffic patterns for a church are different from traffic patterns for a school. That's why we need a law that will require a zoning change for a new school. Here's the link to the article about the charter school in San Pablo that didn't have to request a zoning change, so started building without the neighborhood being alerted to the traffic problems that would ensue. And as you can see, the title of the article is "The Community Isn't Happy About It." But they weren't able to protest. Whereas in this example, a zoning change was required. So the community came out and spoke out about the traffic problems that would be caused by a new school at the suggested location. The charter school changed its mind and will no longer build in that location. That's why we need a zoning change, because when a zoning change is required, the community has to be alerted, and that's what we need. Charter schools are publicly funded with taxpayer dollars, but many times the facilities are not owned by this charter school, which I posit is a loophole to skirt Rural Florida Statute 1013.625. These are a few excerpts from a 2019 study. The stories in the study illustrate how interwoven and self-serving charter governing boards can be. Profiteering may be the most sinister aspect of Florida's charters. Charter Schools USA makes millions renting their buildings. In an earlier slide, I gave a quote from a Republican. Here's what he said: "I think we need to look at where that money's going, making sure it remains in the public sector, that the assets remain for the public, that it just doesn't go into lease options that maybe get turned over to a private corporation." So that's what I'm suggesting. Strengthen 1013.625. And here's an article about a charter school building that sold for $9.9 million, and the school district didn't get any of those profits. And this is just an example of an ordinance on how the charter schools are getting this money. They're getting it through bonds, and then they use our taxpayer money to repay the bond. And this is how 1013.625 reads. But we need to strengthen this so it can be enforced. It says if a charter school is non-renewed or terminated, any unencumbered funds and all equipment and property purchased with district funds shall revert to the ownership of the district school board. But this isn't happening. So I'll talk to you. This is 1013.624 that also needs to be changed, because right now, capital outlay funds can be used on lease payments. But as Nate Monroe said in an article, what is the impact of capital outlay funding being used by charter schools for lease payments? Do these lease payments reflect fair market value? Are taxpayers getting a good deal? Nate concludes, with the scant information available, it's impossible to tell. And then this section, like I said, I'd love to give this presentation to your group. I can talk to them about PICO funds, which is another capital outlay funding that charter schools have been getting, not just our sales surtax money. And this section talks about the sales surtax referendum that we passed in 2020. And this is the sales surtax oversight committee that was created by that referendum. We, the Jacksonville voters, wanting to raise money to fix our publicly owned school buildings that were over 50 years old. The city council blocked us from voting in 2019 when the referendum read that charter schools would get the money on a needs basis. And then in 2020, the state legislatures forced us to give the money to charter schools on a per student rather than a needs basis if we wanted to raise money for a dedicated revenue source for the neighborhood school buildings. You can find out the names of the city council members who stopped us from being able to vote on the referendum in 2019 at this link. The state legislature, this is another quote from Nate Monroe's article, the state legislature passed a law in 2020 requiring sales tax proceeds to be split with charter schools. That law, intended or not, has meant that tens of millions of sales tax dollars earmarked for improving Jacksonville's academic buildings are actually headed to a scattered group of charter schools. The school district proactively created an oversight committee tasked with monitoring the progress. Members of the oversight committee tasked with monitoring have expressed multiple concerns over the long lease charters have to spend the money. So I'd also like for you to write the school board and ask them to improve the dashboard for the charter schools. How are they spending our money? What is the unencumbered funds? We need to know with one page with a row for each charter school, these three things: revenue received, less money spent, and unencumbered funds, because how will we enforce 1013.625 if we don't know what the unencumbered funds are? So I sent this to the school board, but I need more help. I need more people asking them to do this. We need a spreadsheet that will look something like this. List each charter school, the beginning unencumbered balance, how much money they got for this report, how much they spent for this report, and the remaining unencumbered funds, because we need to know the unencumbered funds so we can enforce 1013.625. Integrity Florida report said that 40% of charter schools in Florida have closed since charter schools first were authorized in 1996. And this is a graphic of what 1013.625 looks like. What happens to the assets when charter schools close? The answer to that question is that the assets were not returned to the school district in our county because I sent a public records request. No funds or assets reverted to the school district when charter schools closed in our county. We need to strengthen this statute, 1013.625, because it clearly says if a charter school is non-renewed or terminated, any unencumbered funds and all equipment and property purchased with district public funds shall revert to the ownership of the district school board. So why isn't this happening? The statute also says these issues shall be agreed to in the charter contract prior to the expenditure of funds. So, and this needs to be strengthened. There needs to be penalties if this isn't laid out in the contract, how the assets and the unencumbered funds will be returned to the school district if the charter school should close. So this is what I would love for you to write your representative and ask them to sponsor a bill. Thank you. Let me present this to your group.